I want every white person in this room who would be happy to be treated as this society in general treats our citizens, our black citizens. If you, as a white person, would be happy to receive the same treatment that our black citizens do in this society, please stand. You didn't understand the directions. If you white folks want to be treated the way blacks are in this society, stand. Nobody's standing here. That says very plainly that you know what's happening. You know you don't want it for you. I want to know why you're so willing to accept it or to allow it to happen for others. They don't even realize that they are people of color. They think there's a difference between white people and people of color. White is a color. We're all members of the same race. Now when I do that, instead of saying that, I say, well, every person in this room who considers himself or herself a member of the white race, please stand. They all jump up with great delight. People of the rest of those colors sit there and look at them. Then I say, well, all the people who consider themselves members of the black race stand. Black folks stand, brown race, brown, yellow race, brown. Everybody's standing. I say, now, well, all the people in this room who consider themselves members of the human race, sit down. Everybody sits down. And then they look around like, oh my God. We just admitted something that we didn't know. We are quite certain that there are 4 or 5 different races on the face of the earth. There aren't. There's only one. It's the human race. You and I and everyone here, we're all members of the same race. It's time to get over this idea of several different races. My father would say, you know what's right. You know what's right. Do what's right, by God. That's what you have to do. Do what's right. Do the right thing. You know the difference between right and wrong.
Because we only have one segment to do this show, and there's so very much to do. Let's go to that fateful day, April the 4th, 1968. Martin Luther King was assassinated.
I suppose we have to, don't we?
Yeah.
I hate to talk about that because it makes me sick to remember that day. I get sicker remembering that than I do remembering the day my little sister died. Because you see, for me, Martin Luther King represented hope. He really did. I thought, because he wasn't working for the betterment of black people, he was working for the betterment of all people. That's what he was about. And for me, hope is an acronym for holding on to positive energy. And that's what he was doing. He had been one of our heroes of the month in February and assassinated. Not shot, didn't die, wasn't killed, he was assassinated deliberately because not because he was doing something about racism, but because he ran the Poor People's March on Washington.
Yeah, he had gone beyond.
And when he did that, he was going to upset the economic situation in this country. We knew we could deal with racism. We could perpetuate that indefinitely. But when he went after the economic situation, that scared us. And Martin Luther King Jr. signed his own death warrant when he did that. And he knew it, but he did it anyway. We were studying the Indian unit at the time. We were going to paint the teepee that my previous year's students had made. We were going to put it up in the classroom. We were going to paint it go anyway. I took the teepee home that night. I walked in the door, the telephone was ringing. I answered the telephone, and my sister said, is your television on? I said, no, why? She said, you better turn it on. I said, why? She said, they shot him. I said, who'd we shoot this time? She said, Martin Luther King Jr. I can still remember, it's just one of the worst things that has happened in my life. Because he was something great and good and more important than either of the Kennedys and more powerful than either of the Kennedys. I hate to remember that day. So I washed the teepee and spread it on the living room floor and started to iron it. And then it got worse. I watched Walter Cronkite interviewing 3 leaders of the black community. And he said to those black men, when our leader was killed, his widow held us together. Who's going to keep your people in line? As if JFK was the leader only of white folks. I was furious, absolutely furious. So I changed the channel. And there's Dan Rather saying to 3 leaders of the black community, don't you Negroes think you should feel sympathy for us white people because we can't feel the anger at this killing that you Negroes can? I was appalled. Up until that night, God had looked like Martin Luther King, like Walter Cronkite to me. Yeah. Obviously, old white man with a long gray beard that looked like Charlton Heston playing Moses. Obviously, that was Walter Cronkite. All of a sudden, I had no respect for either of those men. How dare they ask those 2 questions of those black men? They were absolutely offensive. I couldn't believe it. And at that moment, I decided that the next morning, Our lesson plan for the day was to learn the Sioux Indian prayer that says, "O Great Spirit, keep me from ever judging a man until I've walked a mile in his moccasins." I decided that the next morning, if my students didn't understand what we were talking about when we talked about the killing of Martin Luther King Jr., not only was I going to teach them that Sioux Indian prayer, I was going to arrange to have it answered for them. I was going to do what we do in this country. I was going to pick out a group of people on the basis of a physical characteristic over which they had absolutely no control. I was going to say ugly things about them because of that physical characteristic. I was going to treat them as though all the ugly things I was saying about them were absolutely true. I was going to lower my expectations of them. I was going to force them to live down to my expectations of them, and when they did, I was going to say, "See, you're like that because of that physical characteristic." Now, I've been doing that. At that time, I had been doing that for over 33 years as a citizen in the United States of America. I know exactly how to do it. I'm a white woman. I know from birth, prenatally, we know how to treat those that we want to put down, and we do it all the time. We give lessons in that in school. I decided that the next morning I didn't know what physical characteristic to use. I couldn't use height, I was the only tall one in the room. Couldn't use age for obvious reasons. Refused to use weight because we do that all the time. Couldn't use hair color, it's too easy to change. Didn't want to use gender, sexism is rampant. I decided I would do what Hitler did. I would treat my students positively or negatively on the basis of the color of their eyes. My husband and I lived in Waterloo, which was called Little Chicago because of the large black population. My husband ran a store in the black section. And we found out during that time that all the things that we had been told about black people were lies. We had been lied to dreadfully because the way people of color acted, black people acted in that situation were nothing like we had been told to expect. Oh, we had been told
And by whom?
Oh, well, everybody knew that they lie, they cheat, they steal, you can't trust them. All these ugly things that were told in the white community, and as a matter of fact, these are things that are facts. They were all lies. We didn't realize that. We had been fed those stereotypes all our lives. Martin Luther King was one of our heroes of the month in February, every year, along with, unfortunately, George Washington, who owned slaves, bought and sold people for money, Abraham Lincoln, who refused to free the slaves, Davy Crockett, who died while he was killing off Mexicans while we tried to take over part of their land. That was racist teaching. I would not have accused myself of teaching racism, but I did. That was the curriculum that you taught. I taught the curriculum. So what I was doing was not educating, I was indoctrinating. That's what we do in the schools in this country. We call it education, but we indoctrinate students. We teach them how to be good Americans. We teach them a lie in order to guarantee that they're going to be good Americans. And they believe the lie.
What's the lie?
The lie is the superiority of white people. It's a lie. It's a flat-out lie. I thought we had stopped until I talked to my 7th grade granddaughter in Washington State a year ago. They were learning about the Williams Massacre, in which, as she explained it to me, a group of Indians killed a white missionary. I said, "Is your teacher going to tell you about the Mountain Meadow Massacre?" She said, "What's the Mountain Meadow Massacre?" I said, "It's when the Mormons sent a group of Mormons out to kill all the members of a wagon train that were coming through Utah. They killed every member of that except one young girl, I think, may have survived. The soldiers went out, cavalry went out and found this wagon train with all these dead people, knew that the Indians hadn't done it, talked to the Mormons, and they said, 'Yes, we did it.' I said, 'Ask your teacher if he's going to tell you about the Mountain Meadow Massacre.' She called me the next week and said, 'Grammy, you got me in a lot of trouble.' I said, 'What happened?' She said, I raised my hand and asked if we're going to learn about the Mountain Meadow Massacre, and the teacher took me out in the hall and said, Grace, we don't talk about that in this school. I can't teach you that because if I did, you wouldn't be a good American. You wouldn't love America anymore.' I went ballistic. This is not teaching. This is not education. The word education, to educate someone means to be in the act of leading them out of ignorance. You don't do that by indoctrinating them. That child was being indoctrinated. That made it tough for that teacher after that, because what he said no longer had fact behind it. She didn't believe him as much anymore, and she shouldn't have. My father watched the first film that was made in my classroom by the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. The first time I did the exercise, the blue-eyed, brown-eyed exercise, it was just the kids and me, but then it got out. Yeah. And the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation came down and filmed it the next year. I showed that film to my father, and I had never seen my father cry since the death of my 3-year-old sister when I was 10 years old. And after that film was over, with tears in his eyes, he said, "I wish somebody had taught me that when I was 9 years old." Think of all the years of idiocy that he wouldn't have had to live through if some teacher had said to him at the age of 9, "There's only one race, and you and I are all members of the same race, and We are all members of the family of man, and we're going to treat one another like family members. Sibling rivalry is one thing, but racism based on a lie, that's idiocy. I don't know about racism, so before I went to bed that night, I said the only prayer I ever say anymore, "Oh Lord, make me an instrument of thy peace." I said it over and over like a mantra. Within 15 minutes after I started that exercise the next morning, I learned something really valuable. You better be careful about what you pray for. You might get it, and you might find out that was precisely what you did not want. Immediately, I told the kids, blue-eyed people aren't as smart as brown-eyed people. They aren't as civilized. You can't teach them anything. They aren't as clean. Immediately, little brown-eyed Debbie sitting in the front row looked up at me and said, "How come you're the teacher here if you got them blue eyes?" And I thought, well, you look... Wasn't a nice thing, I was thinking. And then a little boy spoke up and said if she didn't have them blue eyes, she'd be the principal or the superintendent. They're both brown-eyed. They immediately took it that they must be brown-eyed because they had power. They were powerful males, so they must be brown-eyed. Immediately, those kids began to treat me the way they had learned to treat people who were inferior to themselves. I thought, surely, if I describe this to the other teachers, they'll understand it, and they'll help me to understand it. I went to the teacher's lounge. There were a number of teachers in the lounge, including the other two third-grade teachers, one of whom was about 54, and the other was over 60, had been molding young minds for over 30 years. I told them what was happening in my classroom the day after Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. When I finished telling them, the younger of those two teachers said, "I don't know how you have time for all that extra stuff. It's all I can do to teach reading, writing, and arithmetic." Well, she hadn't taught reading, writing, and arithmetic yet. She might as well have done the extra stuff. The other one said, and I'll never forget, I can still see her sitting there. She said, "I don't know why you're doing that. I thought it was about time somebody shot that son of a..." No teacher frowned. No teacher said, "God is love." Mm-hmm. No teacher said, "Insomuch as ye have done it unto one of these my brethren, so have ye done it unto me." Mm-hmm. No teacher said, "Judge not, that ye be not judged." Nobody said, "Thou shalt not kill." Every one of those teachers either smiled or laughed and nodded because she had expressed their feelings perfectly.
There was pervasive acceptance.
Absolute acceptance, not only acceptance, approval. She had said what they wanted to say. Mm-hmm. And I left that room determined that no student of mine would ever leave my presence with those attitudes unchallenged. I may not be able to change your attitude, but I can challenge your attitude, and you have to prove to me that white people are superior, and if you tell the truth, you can't do it because it isn't true. And I was done teaching the lie at that point.
Now, getting right along. Your hand is still up. You still didn't learn anything, did you? Didn't I just say when your hand is up, you are thinking of what you're going to say instead of what's being said? Didn't I just say that?
Yes, you did.
And did you hear that?
Yes, I did.
And did you decide that you were just going to do it your way?
I was
Wait a minute, you were on a roll
yes,
there for
I
a minute.
did.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yes, I did.
Now, since you choose to not listen to others, what do you suppose we're going to do where you're concerned?
Now, listen to me.
Thank you very much.
May I finish what I was saying?
No, because you're still thinking what you're going to say instead of what I'm saying. Now, getting right along.
I heard what you were saying.
You're
I
doing it
understand
again.
what you were
You're
saying.
doing it again.
I don't care.
You're doing it
because
again.
It's wrong.
You're doing it again.
Persecuted her for standing
You're
out.
doing it again.
Persecuted him for standing out. The only change that ever happens is when people stand out, and I am sat back.
Martin Luther King Jr. was shot. Are you in any physical danger here? Are you in any physical danger here? Is that girl in any physical danger here?
White people have the right to be ignorant and to insist that they be allowed to remain ignorant, which is the reason I wear this shirt.
Prejudice is an emotional commitment to ignorance.
Absolutely, and we want to maintain our prejudices. And if you think we don't, then you look at what has happened with President Barack Obama. He would have been an extremely successful president, but we white folks have the right to keep him in his place, and that is what we have managed to do with that fine, brilliant young man. Now, I may not agree with everything he has done, but it isn't because of the color of his skin that I disagree with him. But it was and is, and many of the members of the House of Representatives and the Senate said that that's exactly what they were going to do, was stop that black man from being successful as President of the United States. Now, that's not white privilege, that's white ignorance. That's willing to let this country go down the tubes in order to support their own ignorance where skin color is concerned. Well, that used to frighten me, but after Uniontown, Pennsylvania, when 3 carloads of blacks took me to the Pennsylvania Turnpike, going just as fast as they could to get me out of town, because the teachers with whom I had done the exercise in the morning called the superintendent and said, if you don't get that out of town, we're going to shoot her. So they got me out of town. I woke up in Harrisburg. Oh, that was in probably 74, 75.
Okay.
And they got me out of town because they said, they kill people here, so they didn't want me to be one of them. I was scared then. And the next morning when I woke up, 2 days later, all alone in a motel in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and knew that behind one of those sliding glass doors, those windows in that motel, might be the person who was sent there to shoot me, I stopped and stayed in the room, closed the door, and thought, now you have a decision to make. This is what Martin Luther King lived with for the last 3 or 4 years of his life. You can stand here and be frozen with fear and never do this work again, and I had 4 kids at home. Or you can walk out that door and take your chances. So I put my purse over my shoulder and I took my luggage cart handle in my hand and I opened the door and I stiffened my shoulders. I guess I thought if my shoulders were stiff enough and my muscles were stiff enough, the bullets would bounce off. And I walked quickly to the checkout desk and checked out. And when I got there, I thought, you damn dummy, look what you've done. You've allowed them to scare you nearly to death. I will never do that again. I will never be frightened again. You cannot scare me. If somebody threatens to shoot me, now, my husband died 2.5 years ago. He was the reason for my living. We had been married 59 years. He died. Now, if somebody threatens to shoot me, I say, go for it, fool. Things are getting worse now instead of better. We are going backward drastically in this country on a daily basis, and people don't seem to realize it. Or if they do realize it, don't seem to care or want to. As Ronald Reagan said, he wanted to take us back to the good old days, the 50s. Those were good for white men. They weren't worth a damn for people, so-called people of color, or white women, but they were good for white men. That's where he wanted to take us. And he did, in many ways. And now we have somebody running for the presidency who is determined that he'll take us back to that. And in worse ways, you cannot criticize every group that is other than white Anglo-Saxon male and expect a whole lot of people to go along with what you say. But evidently you can't expect them to, because they are. If we could do some empathetic education instead of what we're doing, we could change this thing in 2 generations. I'm absolutely certain of that. My former students are different from their peers because they've had a different 2 days in their lives, have made their lives different for the rest of their lives. If I am right, the other 53 teachers were wrong. You can't have that happen. So they had to prove that I was wrong. I wasn't wrong.
Did they ever implore you to, Mom, hey, we're suffering, stop what you're doing?
No, they never talked to me about it. They never talked to me about it. I didn't realize what was happening. I knew that when Brian came home, I came home from school and he'd been beaten up by 5 high school kids. He was in junior high. He didn't run home fast enough. And 5 of them caught up with him. 3 of them got out and beat him up, and the other 2 stayed in the car, one to drive and one to watch for me coming home. And I called their mothers. One of their mothers said, your kid got what you've been asking for. What did you expect to have happen? I went to the teachers who were abusing, the kids were being abused at the junior high level, and the teacher said, you should have thought of this before you did that exercise. The art teacher, who was the wife of the elementary principal, said to me at a teacher's meeting one day, Jane, get your kids out of this school. These teachers are trying to destroy your children. And that's when we moved away from Riceville. Get over the fact that I've been on television. Any fool can get on television, and a lot of fools do. Just because you get tired, because it isn't working right, don't stop. Persist. If what you're doing is right, keep it up until you make a difference. You might not make any friends, but you might make a difference. We weren't put on this life, on this earth, to serve as ciphers. We are put on this world to make a difference, in my estimation. And I think that every educator could make a difference in the level of racism in this country. Every single one. We have these kids for 6 to 7 hours a day for 9 months of the year. We could have changed the level of racism in this country since I did that exercise. We could have changed the level of racism in this country. We have something we know works, but we don't want to do it. And when I went home that night and told my mother, to my mother's restaurant, and told her what was happening in my classroom, she said, Jane, you better be careful. You don't want to end up where Aunt Eunice did. I said, where'd Aunt Eunice end up? in a mental institution. What I was describing in my classroom that day, happening in my classroom that day, sounded insane, because I had created a microcosm of society in my 3rd grade classroom. And those kids behaved the way we behave in this society on a daily basis. And to her, it sounded insane, because treating people positively or negatively on the basis of a chemical in their skin is a mark of mental illness. We are not acting in sane ways. Jesus did not look like the little Pillsbury Doughboy. Mary did not have blonde hair, blue eyes, and pale skin. They were in the Middle East, and she was a Middle Easterner. And in the Bible it says Jesus had feet of bronze and kinky woolly hair. Color them right. Send out your Christmas cards. Next year you'll have to send out a third as many, because you won't get many Christmas cards.
What's been your biggest disappointment?
Oh, probably when my mother kicked me out of the family, because nobody's comfortable when I'm around. We were the brothers and sisters were really close, because that's all we had. There were 7 of us. We had no money. So we had each other. We were a very closely knit family, and then I wasn't allowed to be part of that anymore. That was a disappointment. As far as the exercise not being taken on, that's not a big disappointment, because I know how scared teachers are. Teachers are scared to death that they'll lose their jobs if they try something new. And now that you have computers, and every kid has a computer, teachers' jobs are really on the line now. So it's a really risky thing to do things that are out of the ordinary. What's my biggest disappointment? Donosaurus T. Rump. Martin Luther King Jr. was one of the most satisfying things for me, what he did. And then the election of Barack Obama. I saw young black males walk straighter and taller and more confidently the day after that election. The day after he became President of the United States, they changed the way they walked. I was absolutely thrilled to death. What I do is not that big a deal. What I do has had very little impact as far as I'm concerned. I wouldn't dream of taking even a smidgen of the responsibility for what Barack Obama became. I thought for a while we had grown up a little. But Barack Obama was a great community organizer. And Sarah Palin said all he was a community organizer. It takes a good community organizer to become President of the United States. I watched how he organized Mitchell County, Iowa. It was absolutely beautiful. It had nothing to do with what I do. It had to do with what he knew how to do. Number one, I wouldn't speak to Donald Trump if I met him on the street. And he would not take advice from me, because I'm an old white woman. I know what I am, and I know what he is. He does not belong in the presidency. He doesn't have the skills for it. That takes a lot of brains. It is not a place for a businessman. You do not run a country the way you run a business. Particularly in view of the fact that so many of his businesses he didn't run. They were run by other people who knew what they were doing, and that's the reason they succeeded. What he tried to do, run a business, failed. We can't afford to have a failure in the White House. We had that.
Are you ever going to retire?
Am I going to retire? Well, I'll stop doing this work when racists stop behaving in racist ways. I figure I've got 50 or 60 more years to go. Yeah, I know. I would love to, oh God, I'd love not to work anymore. Can you imagine? Can you imagine what it would be like in this country? And I know what it would be like, because after the exercise is over and my kids get together, and after the exercise is over in a corporation and people get together, all of a sudden there's a feeling among that group that was never there before. I make families out of students.
Families out of students.
That's what we could do in this country. We could become the family of man.